Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and chatter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today we're going to wrap up our long look at the various stories and myths about Atlantis by looking at the stories of cannibal dwarves of North America and a surprise bonus myth I'm throwing into this video because why not? Now I will note this video was voted for by my ever-wise patrons whose ranks you can join for as little as $1 a month. Patrons get to vote on future content, as well as access bonus videos and other content. So if you can spare $1 a month, why not join the ranks of the Everwise? Of course, if you'd like to support this channel in other ways, please just comment, like, and of course subscribe, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord algorithm. Terribly on his name. Thank you for listening. Now let's get on with the actual myths, shall we? In the novel Lost Continent by Charles Hine that I talked about earlier this summer, the Central American colonies of Atlantis are overrun by groups of small, hairy, man-eating humanoids, and that tickled a memory in me, so I went looking. And I found a myth of the Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples of Colorado and Wyoming, of a race of child-sized dwarves, averaging about 2 to 4 feet tall. They were incredibly strong, faster than a full-grown man, and able to run all day. They were very hairy, had next to no neck and a very squat build, and, oh yes, loved the taste of human flesh. So, what all of us are looking for in neighbors, right? They love the taste of human meat so much that the only way to keep them from eating people was to basically kill them all. Now, I am on the record that genocide is bad, and I stand by that. But if the other guy keeps eating your kids, well, I can kind of see your side of the issue, is all I'm going to say there. Now, because I'm doing my research on the internet and I am not an expert, I was having a hell of a time finding a pronunciation guide for these guys, so I'm just going to leave the name on the screen here. And if you are a member of the Arapaho or Cheyenne peoples, or you have experience with either language, please feel free to let us know the correct pronunciation in the comments. I will be more than happy to credit you. Thank you, I appreciate it. Strangely, as I dug into researching this myth, I found versions of this myth all across the Great Plains. And being pushed by childhood memories, I did find a comparable myth among the Cherokee, and then I tripped over comparable myths among some Californian tribes. For example, the Shoshone people, who live north of the Arapaho, have their own myths of cannibal dwarves. So did the Omaha people of modern Nebraska, although they claim the dwarves only had one eye. And the Kansaw, who shockingly lived in central Kansas, claimed that these dwarves had wings. So a lot of morphological differences here, I guess you could say. A number of tribes ascribed magical powers, such as the ability to turn invisible or cast curses. Many of the tribes said that the dwarves in questions were incredibly violent and aggressive, and that they believed they could only go to the afterlife if they died in battle, and would often kill way more people than they could eat. They even fought with poison arrows that would leave no visible wounds on your body, but if you were hit, you would simply drop dead. Additionally, I found comparable myths among the Crow, Lakota, and Dakota people who lived in the Dakotas and Montana. The Californian tribe, the biggest group I found was the Yanya people of the Sacramento River, who talked about child-sized dwarves who would lure travelers into traps and then eat them. For my money, though, the most unique story from this whole group is from the Cherokee, at least in my opinion. Now, this is regarding a group they called the water cannibal people. I couldn't find a physical description of the water cannibal people, but just from the way they're talked about, I assume that they're humanoid and they look vaguely personish. The water cannibal people live at the bottom of deep rivers and pools, and will come out just after daybreak, shooting anyone they find asleep with magic arrows. They use their powers to leave an illusion body in its place and carry off the real corpse in order to eat it. Now, in this story, a man falls very ill to the point that the clan's healers announce him beyond hope, and fearing the things that would come to torment the dying, like, say, raven mockers from one of my earlier videos, the people of his village left him alone to die. What's interesting here is this is different from contemporary Cherokee tradition, and the story says back then people weren't as kind as they are now. So I just think that's an interesting detail. Now, our hero, or our protagonist, whichever you prefer, is doing his best to die quickly when an old woman of the water cannibal people finds him and takes pity upon him and decides to take him to her home and nurse him back to health. She takes him through a river to a hidden road under the water, and through this road he finds an entire country hidden away, much like the one above the river. If this sounds a lot like European myths, you're not imagining it. This old woman took him to her house and nursed him back to health, but he refused to eat any of the meat that she offered because it was from other people, some of which were people he knew, just to make this extra grisly. Now, the old lady didn't take any offense to this, and in fact used her magic powers to make beans and bread for him to eat instead. So she might have been a human-eating monster, but she was a gracious hostess, and we got to give her points for that. Eventually, he healed up, and she sent him home with a warning not to say a word for 7 days. Unlike your average fairy tale protagonist in Europe, this man was smart enough to keep his damn mouth shut for 7 days by pretending he had a sore throat. After the 7 days passed, he told everyone what happened, and they realized they had to get up early to avoid being murdered. So from then on, all the Cherokee got up before sunrise, thus avoiding being killed and eaten, but only at a horrible cost, if you asked me. Call me lazy, but I view the sunrise as something best never viewed in person. That said, one last thought about the Cherokee story here. It mirrors the way we treat animals today in a way, doesn't it? Because if you're a deer, well, you know more than likely that humans are dangerous. You know that humans kill deer, and you likely have us on the list of predators. At the same time, humans often aid deer who are in distress. How many videos do you see on YouTube of people going out of their way to help a deer get out of a fence or get it out of a pit it's fallen into? And it's not just deer, it's a lot of other wild animals, to the point that in parts of North America, there's an observed behavior on about a dozen or so wild species that if they have a problem and everything else has failed, they'll approach a human to try and solve the problem. So when the local apex predator is also the person you go to solve every other problem you have, and it's a 50-50 bet whether or not they'll, magically kill you or, take you in, nurse you back to health, and feed you, that's got to be weird. And that's the kind of relationship the water cannibal people seem to have with the Cherokee, or at least the vibe I get from this story. Maybe that's just me. But moving on. I also, interestingly enough, found a lot of other stories about magical little people that didn't fit into the cannibal dwarf category. It seems much like Europe and other places, North America had extensive stories of small to tiny people with magical powers who lived out in the wilderness. Many of them could actually be fairly helpful if treated with dignity and respect, but if they felt that they had been insulted, then woe betide you, because all manner of misfortune and terror was going to come by for a visit, and it wouldn't leave soon. If this sounds like a lot of European fairy tales to you, well, you're not the only one to notice that. That said, this isn't a rabbit hole I'm going to dive into, at least not yet. Depending on how my patrons feel, this is a topic I may revisit someday, but we're not going to talk about it this year. Instead, I'll just note there seems to be a common note among many cultures about smaller, more magical versions of humanity that dwell in a close relationship with nature and can be forces for good or ill to local human beings. Now, however, let's turn to the bonus surprise monster of the video, the Peryton, which is a hybrid of bird and deer, with some debate has over the exact body plan. Some picture it as just a deer with wings, basically, but others with the back legs of an eagle. And in some modern tabletop and video games, the creature has the wings and body of a bird with the head and antlers of a deer, which just seems incredibly awkward to me, but I digress. The earliest appearance that anyone can verify of the Peryton is the 1957 book, The Book of Imaginary Beings by Georges Louis Borges. I happen to own a copy of the book, so I'm just going to read right out of it for you, okay? Let's do this. The Sylvian oracles predicted that Rome would be destroyed by Perytons. When the sayings of that oracle disappeared, burned, in the year of our Lord 642, the person responsible for restoring them failed to include that particular prediction, and therefore today there is no indication of it to be found. Given the obscurity of the monster's origins, then, there was a need for a source that might throw more light onto the creature's habits and appearance. Thus it was, after countless difficulties, the author, this is Mr. Borges, has learned that in the 16th century, a rabbi in Fez published a small pamphlet dedicated to fantastic animals, in which case the author mentions having read the work of a certain Arab author, which is mentioned in a treatise on the Perytons, which was lost when Omar burned the library at Alexandria. Although the rabbi did not give the name of this Arab author, he did have a happy idea of transcribing a few paragraphs from that text, therefore leaving us the valuable description of the Peryton. Lacking further corroboration, we think it wise to simply reproduce these paragraphs verbatim. The Peryton inhabits the island of Atlantis and is a creature half stag, half bird. It possesses the head and feet of the stag, and as for the body, it is that of a perfect bird with all of its feathers and plumage. The most astonishing feature of this beast is that when it is struck by the rays of the sun, the shadow it throws upon the ground is not that of its own figure, but rather that of a human being. From this circumstance, some have concluded that Perytons are the souls of men who died far from the protection of the gods. They have come upon as they were feeding upon the dry earth. They fly in flocks and have been seen at high altitudes near the Pillars of Hercules. They are fearsome enemies of mankind. It appears that if they can manage to kill a man, their shadow becomes once again that of their own body, and they attain the favor of the gods. Those who crossed the seas with Scipio to conquer Carthage very nearly failed in their enterprise, for during the crossing a compact band of Perytons appeared, killing many of the sailors. Although our weapons are powerless against the Peryton, the animals can kill but a single man. They wallow in the blood of their victim and then fly off into the heavens. In Ravenna, where they were seen not a few years ago, it is said that their feathers are a sky blue, a fact which I find most surprising, for I have read that the plumage is of a very dark green. The rest of the entry goes on to say that the pamphlet written by the rabbi was destroyed because it was in the University of Munich, and it came down with a bad case of burned by Nazis, which is plausible because, well, most of the works the Nazis burnt were studies of human sexuality and other things. They did burn a lot of things they found out were written by Jewish authors. Now, I am going to include some links in the description below to online sources of the creature, and while none of the reference documents have ever been found, and nor does any other work we have access to even reference the works that Mr. Borges references, eh, I mean, a lot of people believe that he just made this whole thing up for his book, and that is entirely possible. However, it is possible, given how many lost works there are, that these this pamphlet and this Arab book was real, and Mr. Borges just happened to be the one guy in all of history who found out about them. I think that's unlikely, but it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Um, if you want to believe that Mr. Borges came up with this on his own, perfectly viable. If you want to believe that this is a creature of mythology that has been forgotten and brought back to us by Mr. Borges, I don't see any harm in believing that either. So you guys decide for yourself what you want to believe and knock yourself out is going to be my advice. With that, I am going to bring this video to a close and thus bring this year's series on Atlantis to a close. Now, I'm not going to say that we're never going to come back to Atlantis because I have had several works of fiction already suggested to me to look at, and I'm open to throwing more on the pile. So if you have a fiction or mythological work about Atlantis that you would like me to look at and talk about, please mention it in the comments. I do have a pinned suggestion box in the Patreon for those of you who join. So again, just $1 a month. The next 3 weeks, however, are going to be book reviews, starting with Mariner's Wake by Adam Marsh, published by the good folks at Brick Cave Media. I will be posting short companion videos to go with the book reviews. The book reviews themselves will be text, and there'll be a link where you can read them. After that, we're going to wrap up the year by looking at some lost cities that we can verify are real because we found them. So I guess they're not lost anymore, but you know what I mean. I would also like to give a big shout out to Big Steve, the channel's biggest supporter, and I just want to say I hope you guys will join me for the companion videos and the Lost City videos, but until I see you again, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.